So I'm going to show you guys the difference between running your halos in parallel and running them in series. Parallel is when you split the signal into two so that you can plug in two halos. And it's really easy to install a set of lights this way, so a lot of people go that route. They buy a pair of splitters, plug and play, and you're good to go. Nothing you have to worry about, right? Well, then they go and buy something like a Ghost controller. They'll go in the settings and they'll try to control the halos independently, which, is one of the selling points of the Ghost controller. It's why everybody goes with it. Well, the downside is I don't have independent controls of these halos. If I try to add another halo, I don't have any more control. If I turn this down, you can see it's turning down the LEDs on both halos. The issue here is that the controller is controlling each address, and unfortunately what you're doing with this is you're splitting the addresses between both halos, so they're effectively identical. The controller sees this as one halo even though you have two, so it doesn't have the ability to actually control the halos independently. So with our halos, we actually have output pads, and that means that you can continue the data chain beyond this halo into this one. And I'm going to show you guys how you can chain these together to run in series instead of running in parallel. So the first thing you are going to want to do is make sure that you do not have it connected to any form of power. Do not have it connected to controller or any of that when you are attempting any kind of soldering. Now, you do have to solder. I am a big fan of the Sugon A9, but as long as you have a decent soldering iron, this shouldn't be too hard of a job. Effectively, what you're going to want to do is to connect the input of one halo into the output of the other halo. Due to the fact that we mirror our halos, the markings on the board don't necessarily indicate what power and ground is. You have to actually make note of the wiring on the board. So you can see in this case, the ground is on the outside, which means that this pin will also be ground. The power is on the inside, so this pin will also be power. The opposite is true on this one, where the power is on the outside, so this is power. The ground is on the inside, so this is ground. Even though there is a plus icon here, this is your ground. The data is in the middle. So data in is over here, and we do have that secured with glue, and you do have access to your data out, as well as your power and ground. Figure out about how much distance you need of that wire for your build, and go ahead and just cut it. Then you're going to pull this back a little bit and get to the wiring here, and just strip a little bit of that off. Now you're going to want to pre-tin your wires. Basically, that just means you're going to take some of that solder, and you are going to work it into your wiring. And just like that, as you can see, instead of stranded wiring, now it's kind of like one solid piece, and that's just going to make this next step super easy. If you don't do this, it does get a little challenging to get these wires to solder on. So the wires soldered on, you can cut them down just a little bit in length. You don't need to have quite as long as I did there. I usually cut it a little bit longer, then I will pre-tin them and then cut them down to length, and that way they're a nice clean cut. It makes it really easy to solder them in place. Now the next step will be to solder them on, and you can kind of go either way. You can run the wires this way, you can run the wires that way. That part doesn't really matter as much as just making sure you get that power and ground correct. So I do like to split the wires up just a little bit to make life easier, and then I'll just hold them in place and solder them down. Now I've got the wire going into this halo. It starts this halo, it flows around the outside, and it completes here, and then it connects to the next halo. So now we have run these in series instead of parallel. So I go ahead and connect that back in. You can make it kind of play into each other. So if you were to put it like both halos like that, you almost get like a little bit of a figure 8 looking animation there. With the Blue Ghost controller, you have the option of changing to halos. You can see they just kind of flow right into each other like that. So there's a few different options you can do with the Ghost controller. And once again, this is not possible if you are running parallel with a set of splitters. Ideally, you want to run this in series. So that's the difference between series and parallel. It does require cutting the wires and soldering, but as long as you got an iron and some decent solder, it's not too bad.